Good evening, welcome. This is the City of Everett Planning Commission meeting for October 5th, 2021. Can everybody hear me?
Yes, I think the echo is
Thank you.
from Jeff. He's muted now.
Okay, sorry about that. We will call this meeting to order and ask Kathy for a roll call.
Thank you, Chair. Chair Yanasak,
Here.
Commissioner Holland, Commissioner Holland, you're muted.
This is why we do this first step as a practice. We can hopefully have fluid discussion once we get past it.
Yep.
Commissioner Holland, are you there?
He's still muted. I'll go on to Commissioner Zielinski,
Here.
Commissioner Lavra,
Here.
Commissioner Finch,
Here.
Commissioner Adkins,
Here.
and Commissioner Holland. I can see you're still muted.
I may be able to unmute from here. No, cannot unmute. It's probably
Yeah.
good. Okay, well, we'll see if Commissioner Holland checks in later in the meeting, possibly having audio difficulties as well.
Yeah.
Yep.
I do see that Commissioner Holland just posted a note on the chat. If I don't know if that will help him at all. We can get back to him. Boy, the technology never seems to get easier. Let me open with just some general instructions for all participants and guests in the meeting tonight. Planning Commission meetings do remain remote for the time being. And if you are accessing this meeting via phone, please be aware there is about a 10-second delay on the broadcast and stream. If you wish to download the presentation materials or wish to comment and need to see the visual in real time, please visit everettwa.gov/planningcommission. I would like to remind anyone participating to please mute your microphone, or if you are calling in, mute your phone by pressing *6 until called upon. We thank you for your patience and stay tuned in the coming weeks for hopefully more information about bringing the Planning Commission back to in-person meetings at some point. With that, I will ask commissioners if everyone has had an opportunity to review the minutes from our last meeting on September 7th, and if any commissioners have requests for changes or additions. Hearing none, any commissioners with a motion to approve?
This is Commissioner Lavra. I move that we approve the minutes as presented.
This is Commissioner Zielinski. I would second the motion.
Okay, moved and seconded. Kathy, could you roll for a vote?
Thank you. Commissioner Atkins,
Yes.
Commissioner Finch,
Abstain.
Commissioner Lavra,
Yes.
Commissioner Zielinski,
Yes.
Commissioner Holland. You're still muted. You might want to try calling in again. And Chair Yanasak?
Yes. I believe that was enough votes to carry.
Yes,
Is
it
that
is.
correct?
Yes.
Okay, perfect. Okay, do we have any reports from commission members? How about staff comments? Is that York?
That is. Good evening, planning commissioners and members of the public tuning in today. I'll give a few updates on past planning commission items and some regional planning items this morning, or this evening. On items that have been before the Planning Commission earlier this year, one very notable one is the Rethink Housing Action Plan is on the City Council's agenda tomorrow for their consideration. And that'll hopefully mark the transition from the action planning phase to the action implementation phase. So very excited for that. This has been a huge effort, and including some last minute polishing that's going on down to the wire. I will save my thanks for all of the folks who worked hard on that until the next meeting though, so I don't jinx anything for the council's consideration tomorrow. One thing I did want to note for that Rethink Housing is that we heard the Planning Commission's request a month or three ago to add an action related to homelessness, and wanted to report that the final draft to the council does include a high priority action to coordinate an alleviating homelessness plan with community partners that addresses current and future needs of unsheltered community members and includes prevention strategies. The council had also mentioned a desire to add that sort of an action, and so hopefully that will work, and of course the implementation of that will be the important part. Speaking of implementing housing actions, that's Bobby here. I'm excited to share that we're submitting an application this week for a housing action plan implementation grant that's offered through the State Department of Commerce. If successful, we would apply those grant funds to hire a consultant to support a detailed review and update of the city's housing development incentives, including the multifamily tax exemptive, which is a pretty significant one that received some attention and some revisions in the state law from the legislature in this last legislative session. Incentives like height and density bonuses and fee reductions and waivers for affordable housing. This would get us to work immediately. Pretty record time. If the council does act on Rethink Housing tomorrow evening, the grant application would go out the next day on Thursday morning. A number of actions in Rethink Housing, I think 4 or 5 actions would be addressed at least in part through that scope of work in that grant, and would help us ensure that we're getting the best housing production bang for the incentive buck. This would also add to 2 other ongoing grant funded scopes of work that we are partnering on or leading, focusing on transit-oriented development around the city's planned light rail stations. And then finally, on the past Planning Commission items, staff is taking just a little bit more time to work through some of the questions and comments that we heard from the council regarding home occupations at their August 18 and September 1 meetings. And we'll be bringing that ordinance back to the council this winter for continued review and consideration. Any questions on any of those past Planning Commission items? Otherwise, I'll launch into regional planning news. Okay. In regional planning news, the County Council formally approved and adopted the countywide planning policies in September. Those policies will, together with the multi-county planning policies and the procedural and substantive requirements of state law, will govern the upcoming comprehensive plan periodic updates for the City of Everett, Snohomish County, and all the other cities within the county. I will say it is good to have some certainty on the policy framework. It's a good set of policies, and we look forward to starting that periodic update process and putting those policies to work at the local level. The County Council also in September approved the buildable lands report. That one has showed an apparent shortfall in capacity for Everett for the existing 2035 housing targets using the buildable lands methodology. Given that apparent shortfall, the city will need to work in some so-called reasonable measures into the upcoming comprehensive plan update to increase consistency of actual development with the plans and assumptions in our comprehensive plan. Speaking of capacity and growth numbers, staff has continued to participate over the late summer in a growth targets working group of the Snohomish County Tomorrow Planning Advisory Committee. The Planning Advisory Committee is the staff group of staff from the cities and the counties and the 2 island tribes. Those growth targets, once they are adopted formally by the County Council on recommendation from the Snohomish County Tomorrow Steering Committee, are an amount of residential and employment growth that each city and the county will agree to accommodate and plan for in their updated comprehensive plans. I think I've mentioned this in previous meetings, but Everett's initial growth targets are significant. Represent growth of 69,000 people and 71,000 jobs between 2017 and 2044, which is notably 2 to 3 times recent observed growth rates. It will be a heavy lift to accommodate and ensure that that we are setting the stage for actual achievement of that growth in our comprehensive plan periodic update. That's going to be one of the main focuses of that update. But staff is optimistic that the growth can be accommodated, particularly if the actions in Rethink Housing are implemented, and also optimistic that if achieved, that growth will represent positive, a good for the city. The Snohomish County Tomorrow Steering Committee, once the Planning Advisory Committee wraps up their work, will begin consideration of the growth targets in late October, and then the County Council will be asked to make a final decision on those growth targets by the end of the year, and that will be probably about the last major piece of information that we will need to kick off our comprehensive plan periodic update, which we are planning on doing with scoping in January of 2022. That's all I got for staff notes this afternoon. Happy to take any questions on any of that or everything else planning related is on the table as well.
Thank you, York. Any commissioners with questions? All right, thanks a lot. Let's move forward. We do have a fairly cram-packed agenda tonight with 3 main items, but before we get to that, if there are any citizens present tonight who did wish to address the commission on any matters that are not on the agenda, matters that we wouldn't otherwise be addressing tonight, now would be the time to do that. If you could maybe just unmute yourself and signal that you'd like to speak if that's something you're here to do. Kathy, were you advised if anybody was intending to do that tonight?
No, I just have 3 guests tonight and they're all muted right now, so.
Okay. I saw Mr. Mohammed briefly unmute. I don't know if he wanted to speak now or there'll be plenty of opportunity later as well for the agenda matter.
No, I just pressed it by mistake. I have nothing.
Okay.
Right. Thank you.
Okay, great. Yeah, thank you. No problem. Okay, well then with that, let's go ahead. We are having a public hearing tonight on 3 matters. The first one is a comprehensive plan land use designation change and rezone for 7500 Hardeson Road. Do we have a presentation on that? Is that York? Are you doing that?
Yeah, I'll take the presentation on the just a quick overview, and then the first 2 items, A and B, the 7500 Hardeson Road future land use redesignation and rezone, and the Smith Island annexation map corrections, and then I will hand it over to Bob Leonard and Lisa Gruder for item C, which is the main event tonight, the parks element, capital facilities element, and parks impact fees.
Thank you, York. Before you get started, let me just say, if this is our public hearing, so I think we are opening the public hearing at this point. I just wanted to note that.
Great. Okay, I'll get us started here. As I mentioned, we have 3. So every year, the state law limits comprehensive plan amendments to 1 package per year in general, and this is to help the public get a handle on all the different items that are changing in the comprehensive plan, help it be a fairly durable and infrequently changed document. And this year so every year we open up a docket application cycle for members of the public, property owners, businesses, and others to formally request changes to the comprehensive plan, and then the city also initiates changes each year as part of ongoing reviews to the comprehensive plan and other needs that come about externally. This year we have 3 items as part of the 2021 package of comprehensive plan amendments. You see them on the screen here. We have one site-specific redesignation and rezone. We have a couple map corrections associated with the Smith Island annexation that became effective earlier this year. And then we have the park revisions to the park element, capital facilities element, and park impact fees. So I won't spend too much time with these first 2 because you had a briefing on both of those on August 17th, I believe it was. And we were able to answer a few questions back at that time. So just a recap, and then we want to give an opportunity to the public to speak up on any of these issues. Item A here is a redesignation of our future land use map and a rezone on our zoning map. This was a property owner request from the owners of the parcel at 7500 Hardeson Road. The site is about 1 1/3 acres. It is located smack in the middle of our manufacturing industrial center and our industrial cluster around Paynefield in southwest Everett. It is part of a commercial node that exists on both sides of this intersection. There are some other commercial, retail, and services uses that are kitty corner from this existing parcel that are currently covered under a planned development overlay and are to some extent non-conforming with the light industrial zoning at that site. Similar situation at the site in question. It is currently designated industrial and zoned light industrial 2. It is developed with the recent construction of a convenience store and gas station. The property owners, I believe, would like to add a couple more retail and food services type uses to that, and also regularize the uses that are on there rather than having them non-conforming. To do that, we would redesignate the land use designation in the future land use map to commercial mixed use and rezone that parcel to business. Details are in your staff report. Here's a map of where we're looking at the south side of the intersection is 75th and Hardeson. And the initial staff recommendation, I call it initial because we haven't closed the public hearing and given a chance to hear from the public on that, but pending anything notable coming out of public comment, staff recommendation is to approve Planning Commission Resolution 21-03. Depending what we hear tonight, if there's not a lot of questions and not a lot from the public on these, we do recommend that the Planning Commission close the public hearing on items A and B. We are going to be recommending continuing item C and keeping the public hearing open until your next meeting in 2 weeks. But so we don't have to come through and do this this briefing again 2 weeks from now. We do recommend you close the public hearing on this item A. Happy to take any questions and hear from the public.
Thank you, York. Commissioners, any discussion, questions on this matter?
And to clarify, we're not asking for action today on A and B. You can close the public hearing and then take action on all 3 items together 2 weeks from now.
Okay, great. Questions? Okay, we can't come back. Let me ask if there's anyone from the public, any guests we have tonight who are wishing to address the commission on this matter of the proposed resolution 2103. And if you did wish to address us, go ahead. We're a fairly small group. Just go ahead and unmute yourself and go ahead and introduce yourself, and we can take your comment. All right, it sounds like there are none. And with no additional commissioner questions or comments, that might conclude our public hearing. Do we have a motion? A motion to close the public hearing, anyone?
I move to close the public hearing.
Commissioner Finch, thank you. A second, do we have a second?
This is Commissioner Zelinski. I would second the motion.
Thank you. Let's go ahead and have a vote to close the public meeting on this matter.
Commissioner Atkins,
Yes.
Commissioner Finch,
Yes.
Commissioner Lavra,
Yes.
Commissioner Zelinski,
Yes.
Commissioner Holland,
Yes.
Chair Yanasak.
Yes.
Thank you.
Thank you. So staff is recommending that we delay action on the resolution itself until our October 19 meeting. Any commissioners have any comments about that? I think that makes sense. So we'll go ahead with that matter closed. We'll go on to the second item on the agenda, which involves the Smith Island annexation map amendment. I think that's again Yorick. Go ahead.
That is. Thank you, Chair.
And we'll open the public hearing on this matter now as well.
Great. Thank you. So same deal here. This is a city-initiated proposal to correct two maps. We completed an annexation of the western portion of Smith Island, which includes the tidelands and some submerged water lands west of where the previous city limits had been. That became effective earlier this year. Subsequently, staff noticed two maps that did not get amended to properly reflect that annexation. Normally, we try to catch all the maps as part of the annexation itself. We have a lot of maps, official maps in the comprehensive plan and in the development regulations, and so two of those slipped by us, and we are just cleaning those up today. One of those is the future land use map that you're familiar with. The amendment that we are proposing today would remove the submerged areas of the annexation area from the local resource lands future land designation. I believe this is an operation that we took on other submerged areas throughout the city previously. I'm not sure when that was. But because this was not part of the city at that time, it was not done at that time. And so we were just cleaning up all of the areas below the ordinary high water mark and removing them from local resource land designation, which otherwise applies to mainly agricultural land near Lowell. You can see the effect on the map before on the left and after on the right, and this would just be designated water. Future, the title is wrong on this slide, but the maximum building height map establishes maximum heights. We're fairly unique in regards to having a separate map for height than we do for zoning. So we have one map that establishes the zoning and the types of uses and other regulations that apply to properties, and then we have a separate map that establishes the maximum height. I think that played some role in missing this one when we did the annexation. The staff proposal is to fill in all of the areas above the ordinary high water mark with the same 7-story maximum height that the rest of Smith Island is currently designated for. No other changes. Initial staff recommendation is to approve Planning Commission Resolution 2104 and send that recommendation to the council along with the other items as part of this 2021 Comprehensive Plan Amendment package. And again, just for expedience, recommend closing the public hearing today, and then can take action on A, B, and C all together in 2 weeks' time.
Thank you, Yorick. Anything else?
Nope, just happy to take any questions.
All right. Any commissioner questions? All right, Commissioner Zelinski, you have a question?
Yes, I do. I, just for my own benefit and for the public record, would like to hear just a little resume from the staff on the history of the 7-story building height limit on Smith Island.
I would like to comment on that as well, and I guess I'll wait until after that resume.
I've got to say you have got this fairly new planning director stumped on this one because that was established before I got here, and I have not heard much about the history on that. I know we do building height does not mean only buildings as you commonly think of them. It also applies to structures, industrial structures. If you had like a conveyor belt, elevated conveyor belt, or a material storage, it would cover for that too. So my guess is that the 7 stories is to accommodate the full range of industrial uses that could locate on Smith Island, and then that would carry over as well. The whole island is in the shoreline jurisdiction as well, and the shoreline master program has some considerations in terms of height, visibility, and blocking of views that would need to be, any development would need to be consistent with those shoreline policies and goals and regulations as well. But that's about all I have for you off the cuff, which is, I guess, shows why it's a good thing that we have one more meeting in 2 weeks' time. And if it's okay with the commission, I would love to send you a written response to that. I'd be curious to hear a little bit more about it as well. We'll send that written response before the meeting and summarize it briefly and see if there's any follow-up questions at that time.
I see there's a couple hands. Before we get to that, I'll let Commissioner Zielinski, did you want to have a follow-up on that?
No,
Question.
I just wanted to thank staff for that. I've been around on the commission much longer than you've been on the staff, York, but I'm just a little, I'm not clear in my own head as to where we were with the 7-story limit there. And I think it would be helpful for the record to have that.
Absolutely, and since we're extending that 7 to land that did not have it before, definitely worth clarifying. So thank you for the question.
Commissioner Lawver, did you want to follow up as well?
Yes, I did. So I was perplexed by that, and I looked at the area, and I can see that there are some industrial structures that would be over 50 feet in the areas along Highway 529. But I would suggest that you look at the possibility of that western portion that you just added maybe being 4 stories, 4 floors. It's a lower lying area. It's a log yard. It's in the floodplain. I just question what kind of 7-story building could be put in that area. Could be fill. It looks like there's some kind of pond as well as a log yard in that area. It just seems like a strange place for a 7-story structure. So I think maybe that should be looked at again.
Great, thank you. I definitely will do, and I guess I will amend my recommendation, and maybe we keep the public hearing open for this one just in case our research turns up anything of interest, and to give a chance for, I know that there are 2 property owners there, Miller Shingle and Pacific Topsoils, I believe. So there are 2 property owners that may have some thoughts about what they intend for future uses there, and we'll hear a little bit of history from staff who have worked on shoreline policies. I do know that it's a fairly heavily regulated, as you said, it's in the floodplain, although I believe it is filled out of the 100-year floodplain, but it is in the shoreline jurisdiction, and so it's got an extra layer of regulations on it. So not anything is possible in there, but we'll come back with some more information, and I'll plan on opening a discussion and being prepared for that in 2 weeks' time on this item.
Commissioner Holland, I see you have a hand raised as well.
Yeah, thank you, Commissioner Holland here. Just one suggestion as part of the resolution. The 2 maps that were included in the resolution show like the greater height area and the greater zoning designation area. I think including those, something similar to the 2 maps you included tonight in the presentation as part of that resolution would kind of allow people to understand exactly the area that is being dealt with, even though you're replacing the maps in either the comp plan or the code, which is the full figure. But just to have that understanding, if somebody ever went back and looked at the resolution and understood the area we're talking about here this evening.
It's a good point. Will do. Thank you.
Any other commissioner questions or comments? Okay, let's move on. If there's any members of the public or guests we have tonight who are interested in addressing this resolution, now would be the time to do that. Go ahead and just unmute yourself and state your name and we can hear your comments.
It looks like they're all muted right now.
Okay, I will take that as an indication that there are nobody from the public tonight to speak on this. And it has been suggested that maybe given the questions raised by some commissioners tonight, that we keep the public hearing open on this matter until our October 19th meeting. Any commissioners have any discussion or comments about that? I think hearing no objection, let's go ahead and we'll do that. We will keep the public hearing open, and additional materials can be submitted, and we can address that further on the 19th of October. Any final commissioner input before we move on to the next matter?
Chair Yanis,
okay.
Commissioner Holland here.
Go ahead.
I'm not certain if it's necessary or not, but you could weigh in on it. Since we actually had a motion to close the public hearing for item 5A, do we need to have a motion to keep it open for 5B is my question.
I think it's, I understand it to be held open until closed. So, but good to put that on the record, and I think we can operate on consensus on that.
Okay. Yeah. Thank you. Good point, Commissioner Holland. Appreciate that. So, yeah, we'll go ahead and, by consensus of the commission, just keep this matter open. 5B. So, moving on to the third agenda item, the comprehensive plan, parks, capital facilities element, and parks impact fees proposal. We will open the public hearing on this matter as well. And Bob Leonard, are you going to be presenting?
No, but I will just say Bob Leonard, Parks and Facilities Director, City of Everett. I just want to thank the commission for having us. We look forward to, I want to introduce Lisa Gruder. She's with Burke Consulting. She's helping us with our park and recreation open space plan. As part of that, we are updating the park element of the comp plan and looking to potentially implement park impact fees. We did come before the commission last meeting, so this will be some new information and follow up to that meeting. So with that, Lisa? You're muted, Lisa.
Thank you. Good evening, commissioners. I'm going to share my screen. So hopefully you're seeing C, parks element, capital facilities element, and parks impact fees. So this is the organization of the slides you're about to see. First, covering the schedule, a little bit of information on the Parks Recreation Open Space Plan, and then we'll focus on the proposal before you, the purpose of it, the policies, the impact fee rate, and then there would be a companion change to some code around multifamily common open space to allow an in lieu fee. So this is a similar schedule as we presented in your September meeting. We have on the top here the parks element goals and policies and impact fee started earlier this year in 2021 for the docket. And towards the end of the year here, it's before the Planning Commission and City Council. And the goal is to consider and complete by the end of the year. The Parks, Recreation, and Open Space Plan, it was also started earlier this year with a visioning process and development of some concepts and proposals. We have a draft plan underway that will be going to the Parks Board in the fall, and then off to the City Council for adoption by March 1st. This is another view that shows the relationship of what you have before you, the Parks Element Impact Fee and the PROS plan going to the Parks Board and Council. basically completing either end of year or first quarter in the case of the PROS plan. And these will all help feed into the comprehensive plan periodic update. We have been developing the goals and policies, in particular in the PROS plan, to go out to the next 20-year horizon of your comprehensive plan. So just a couple words about the PROS plan itself. It is an update to the 2016 Parks, Recreation, Open Space, or PROS plan. It allows Everett to be eligible for grants, and it contains a lot of information that meets the requirements of the Growth Management Act for inventory and a capital program. So it is supporting the comprehensive plan and the plans and budgets. The engagement process that we've been addressing through the PROS plan has also helped us with some of the policies before you, especially the level of service policy and some of the capital improvements that are before you in the capital facilities element. So we had survey, pop-up events, and a vision workshop in the spring and summer, and had about 700 participants over all those events. And these keywords at the bottom of the screen are highlighting what we heard that the public was very interested in, to have a connected and accessible system, to provide green space and connection with nature, to have opportunities to play and to meet family and friends, to have versatile types of facilities to play ball or recreate. And then a lot of interest in being able to view and touch the shoreline. Also a lot of input around making sure the parks are clean and safe and that they're open to all. And so some of the capital projects that are in the capital facilities element are meant to address the engagement that we've heard so far. So now on to the proposals before you. We wanted to just give a quick overview about the purpose of the impact fees, and then we'll get into more of the details of the proposal. So the impact fees are a one-time charge. They are not meant to fund 100% of growth facilities that are necessitated by development. So they're kind of joint public and private funding. The public will contribute towards necessary facilities for growth, and the impact fees are the share that the private development would contribute. And as growth occurs, the impact fees would help ensure that the facilities are in place to meet the needs of the new community members. Right now, this was a question that came up in September, wanting to confirm what else the city has in place that are similar to parks impact fees. The city currently charges for transportation impact fees and school impact fees, and what are called system development charges for water and sewer systems that are similar area-wide improvements. So the impact fees have to be based on a level of service and linked to a capital project list. And as I mentioned, they cannot be used to fund 100% of the need. Because the impact fees need to be based on a level of service and the capital project list, that has led to the proposals before you to amend the parks and recreation element and the capital facilities element. The other question or context we wanted to provide was the city has for some time identified park impact fees as one of several opportunities to fund the park system. The park system does benefit the community in a number of ways. It is allowing for healthy, active living. It provides places to connect with people and with nature, and studies have shown the economic benefits of parks to the local economy and to property values. Each community gets to set its own levels of service and funding, and the city has identified in current policies in the parks element and the capital facilities element, parks impact fee is one of several opportunities to fund parks. With that context, we have before you Parks and Recreation element updates. That includes updating the inventory, amending the level of service, and there are a number of other policies in the existing element that we're suggesting be amended based on the public input received to date. The reason to do that now is that the parks element could serve both as policies for the comprehensive plan and be identical in the pros plan so that there's continuity and consistency between the documents. The capital facility element has a small update to inventory information and primarily includes a capital list that fit that level of service in the parks element. And then the impact fee code is similar to the city's other impact fee codes. It would set a rate, identify exemptions or partial exemptions and credits towards the fee. And as you'll see as we go through the proposal, it includes a phasing mechanism. The other element we are amending is in the multifamily standards. There's already a requirement for common open space. There is a way for folks to pay a fee in lieu of providing the open space on site, but there's not much in the way of criteria. So this proposal would address that. So as I mentioned, part of the parks and capital facility element is to provide an inventory. And so we've included information that we've gathered through the parks planning process as to what assets the city is already managing. And so we've included some of this information in the element, and we've included an inventory map at a broad scale. We've also identified background information about community demographics in each district and identified the ability of residents to walk within 10 minutes of an active park. That is a goal that a number of entities are promoting as a way to address healthy active living, is to have parks and trails in proximity to the population. So citywide, about 64% of residents can access a park or trail within 10 minutes. Most districts are at or above that level. District 4 is below, and that's in the south end of the city. So that's the inventory and profile that is in the Parks and Recreation element. This is a recap of some of the other elements updated in, or the other components in the Parks and Recreation element and the Capital Facilities element. It includes the background information, the fact that we're trying to be consistent with other city plans and initiatives such as Shoreline Master Program and Hazard Mitigation Plan and Climate Action Plan and things like that. It sets forth a level of service, has goals and policies and actions, and then the capital facility element has minor updates to the climate strategy actions, has a little bit on the system description and that 10-year capital program. So one of the key policies is around level of service. So this is summarizing information that we'll share in terms of numbers in a minute. But the level of service is meant to get at a few different aspects of the park system. So one of the things it gets at is what would the city invest in as it grows? And that would include increasing parks and trails, so park acres and trail miles at a similar rate to what the current population enjoys. So that's taking today's inventory of acres and miles and dividing by the population and saying, as we grow, we want to add a similar amount so that the system stays current. Where would we propose to put those facilities? We would put them so that they help reach the population within a 10-minute walk. And then how much would we invest would be at a rate similar to the current value of the system. So if you take the current value of the park system as if you had to replace it and divide that by the population, there's dollars per person And so the goal would be to invest at a similar rate as the current community enjoys. So that's the concept. I wanted to mention, York touched on this earlier in the meeting, but we are proposing to match the city's growth targets for population and employment. The capital program in the element and the park impact fee go through a 10-year period through 2031. We also, in the PROS plan and the Parks and Rec element, do reference 2035, which is your current growth horizon year for your targets. And then, as I mentioned, in the Parks, Recreation, Open Space plan as a whole, we are addressing growth through 2044. What this is showing in the blue is the population growth target, which out to 2035 goes up to 165,000 people. We are also recognizing there will be growth in employment over time. And as we get into the level of service, we are counting a share of that employment when we figure out the level of service, the demand, and the impact fee. We are choosing not to count all of the future employment growth, but a share of it. And when we count in both residents and employees, we call it residential equivalent. So you'll see reference in the next slides to both residential population and residential equivalent growth. So this is expressing in numbers what I just described in the concept, which is the idea is to invest in the acres of parks, the miles of trails, and then access and per capita. Generally, what we're proposing is to invest in the system at a rate similar to what there is today. So first, with total acres per thousand, today there's about 8.2 acres per thousand people, residents. We are not proposing to carry that forward as a level of service, sort of the minimum level of service, because as a built-out city or largely built-out community, it would be pretty hard to maintain 8.2 acres per thousand people because land is limited. Instead, what we propose is basically keep at least the system you have, and if resources allow, through grants or other opportunities, donations, try to target for that. Where we would instead put some effort is into investing in properties the city already has. So the city has about 920 or so acres of property, and about 200 acres of that 920 are developed. So the city has within its assets some parkland that could potentially be further developed with the appropriate types of facilities that fit the environmental context. If you look at developed acres per thousand, that's about 1.7 per thousand. We would carry that forward. So the level of service would say for every 1,000 new people, try to add to the development of the current system. Where we'd like to see some additional capacity in addition to the existing system would be in neighborhood parks or urban parks. Urban parks would be those around the stations and downtown, for example. Here, the level of service would be both for the residential population and a share of the jobs. And today there's about a half an acre of neighborhood or downtown park per thousand. We would carry that forward. And then in terms of trails, there's two types: the paths in the parks that allow for walking in and around the properties, and multi-purpose trails, which are more regional in nature. And so here, for the paths and parks, it would be primarily based on a residential population, and it would go, we'd carry forward a little over 1/10 of a mile per thousand. And for multi-purpose trails, that's the big regional trails. It's the Milltown Trail and the interurban. We would carry that same ratio forward, and recognizing it has recreation and commute value, it would be applied to both residential and employment population. And then access, we're trying to get each district up to the citywide share of population within a 10-minute walk. That's the base to try to get everything up to that citywide number. And then as resources allow, go above 80%. And then finally, per capita investment, again, is taking the value of the system divided by today's population and saying how much should we invest. It should be at a rate similar to what the current population enjoys. There's an asterisk there because if the city can be more efficient in providing these other assets within proximity to the population, this would be sort of a second tier level of service. It's a goal. It gives a place to look in the budget to see how well the city's doing, but these other ones would control. So that's the level of service that led to identifying capital projects. And there, here is just saying if we were to apply that level of service I just described to the expected growth within 10 years, then we would need to add this many acres and this many miles. The total investment includes investing in the level of service. It also includes projects for renovation as well, but impact fee would only be for projects that relate to growth. So while at a per capita basis, the investment could have looked like 129 million for just the growth, the proposed projects that can get us to that level of service of developed acres, neighborhood park acres, and miles of trails and paths was a combination of projects that the city had been identifying for some time, plus new projects to meet the level of service. And so the project list was more modest at 78.8 million of impact fee eligible projects. The other projects that are related to renovation are still in the capital facilities list. They would come from other funding sources like REIT or grants. But to have a complete list of projects that the city would build over the next 10 years or renovate, it helps the city obtain grants to have the projects all listed in the capital facility element, whether they're for growth or for existing residents. So that leads to how we would calculate the fee. This gives you another view, and this is just based on a per bedroom. So here we have, if we were to charge 129, an impact fee based on the 129.2 million investment, that would be roughly at that 29.60 rate. But because we have achieved our other acres and miles, and the per capita investment is a secondary level of service consideration, we have a project list that's 78.8 million. That per bedroom would be about $1,882. So if we had had more expensive projects, or the cost of some of the projects were higher, the per bedroom fee could have looked more like this amount. Instead, what we're suggesting as a starting point is a fee based on these more detailed projects in the capital facilities element. And as I go forward with the impact fee rates, you'll see we're comparing what we call the proposed fee at 1,800 to half of that fee at 941 per bedroom. But I wanted to put in context that we kind of, from the beginning, tried to be efficient and careful with the capital program to have a reasonable fee. And so we're kind of starting in the middle there. This, if we were to go to the $78.8 million capital list of impact fee eligible projects, that's that 1,882 we were just looking at per bedroom. That's this fee. 100% means the full amount we would charge for that list. It already excludes other funding sources like real estate excise tax. So when we say a fee 100%, it means 100% of what we could charge, less the proportionate share from other funding sources. We discussed that some of the levels of service are meant for both population and a share of employment. And so these would be the rates per square foot on non-residential development. We have compared these fees both at 100% and at 50% to other community example impact fees. So here is the 50%, so the half of the amount chargeable to other communities in Snohomish County and in the region. And so the red ones are the Everett fees at 50%. And again, because we are charging by bedroom, but other communities charge by either single family or multifamily, it's not the most straightforward of presentations, but you can see at 1 bedroom size, we'd be on the low end of the proposed fees, charging half the rate. Also similarly lower compared to the other examples at the 2-bedroom scale. And the 2-bedroom is the most common unit type today in Everett. The second most common is the 3-bedroom. So at the 50% of the rate, we'd be in the middle of the examined communities. So we chose to look at communities inside Snohomish County, but also other communities that are similar to Everett in population or employment character that the city has looked at as peers in other studies. So that's at 50%. If you were to charge the full fee at the 1-bedroom scale, we're still at the left side of the graph, the lower end. The 2-bedroom goes more into the middle, and the 3-bedroom would be closer to the upper end of the range of example communities. So that's residential, and then we've done the same for commercial. There are fewer communities that charge commercial fees, but there are several inside Snohomish County and elsewhere that do recognize that there is some demand from employees that have access to the community's assets. So this first graph again is doing half of the chargeable fee, and at that rate we would be on the lower end of the examined communities. Other communities tend to charge just residential. So we would be less than, we're showing Redmond, Bothell, Mountlake Terrace, Sumner, which is small in population but has a large manufacturing industrial center, and Linwood, which is on the right-hand side here, the larger of the fees per square foot. That's 50%. At 100%, we'd be sort of in the lower to middle of the pack of these same examined communities. At the Planning Commission's request at the last meeting, we did layer on these fees onto 2 example developments and then compared to other jurisdictions. So this top one, and York, please feel free to dive in with anything about these particular projects, but Mountain View Building is a light industrial building over 300,000 square feet that I believe has already been permitted or close to being permitted. And so we've compared to a number of jurisdictions for which we had impact fee information. And you'll see Tacoma does not charge impact fees. That's why it's 0 here. And then we've looked at a number of communities that charge impact fees of some kind. The ones with the star by the name charge commercial or non-residential impact fees. So some of these, like Kent and Renton, do not charge commercial or non-residential impact fees, but these Redmond and Linwood do. And Everett would fall in combining transportation, parks, and schools, would fall in to the sort of middle of the examined jurisdictions at the 100% mark and closer to the left-hand side lower end at the 50% mark. And then similarly for residential development, we looked across these jurisdictions and combined transportation, parks, and schools and school impact fees. At the 100% mark, we are less than the other examined jurisdictions. And we would be further to the left in terms of charging half of the fee. So that was in response to that question of what does it look like to layer on impact fees. And so in summary, our recommendation after reviewing all the material and looking at this being a new fee and wanting to be sensitive to economic development while also wanting to advance the park system so that it provides assets for the new growth. Where collective recommendation is to go with 50% of the fee and also to phase it, and there's more information on phasing that I'll share. By reducing the fee, that would mean that the capital projects are scheduled in such a way that they reflect that it would be less than the full fee for park impact fees, and the city would be looking for other funding options to get the balance of the level of service. So basically, we would keep the level of service as proposed so that the system grows as the community grows at a similar rate as today. But there will be more other funding options that we would pursue or the city would pursue in addition to the park impact fee to get to the rest of the level of service goals. And so, York, maybe you want to describe this a little bit. I think this is taking unit growth that the city has experienced over. Yeah.
Yeah, so we took a look at our permit tracking system and pulled out the building permits that were issued in the last 12 months of data that we had available. I believe it was September 1, 2020 through August 31, 2021. And during that time, we permitted just over 1,000 housing units. Didn't have the data immediately at hand at what bedroom structure distribution was in those. I think it's fair to assume 1.5 bedrooms each. Lisa said that the most common building types in Everett currently are 2 and 3 bedroom, but most of these units are in apartment developments that trend towards the smaller size 1 bedrooms, even a lot of studios. So 1.5 bedrooms each is reasonable. That may even be generous and maybe a little bit below that. And then you can see those commercial services and office, retail, and industrial development that was all permitted. That Mountain View industrial building, there were 2 buildings there. Right there was 700,000 square feet worth of tilt-up speculative industrial construction that is now looking for a tenant. On the residential side, that 1,000 units a year is relatively high for recent years. I think we've typically been permitting more like 600 units a year, but looking forward, the growth targets anticipate higher development levels. So that could be a reasonable middle ground between higher than what we've recently seen, but maybe more in line or even below what we might expect if those growth targets realize. At those proposed rates, that would net the city between 1.7 million at the 50% mark, or 3.5 million at the 100% mark for parks capital facilities per year.
And Bob, I think that's at the 100% mark. This would be equivalent to the cost for MAUL. That is about 1.5 acres or a little less than that as a neighborhood park. I believe that's a reasonable reference point.
That is correct.
So as I mentioned, part of the proposal is to phase in the proposed impact fee, recognizing it's a new fee and projects that are in progress would not necessarily have accounted for that in their pro formas. And so the idea would be in the first 6 months that there would be no fee. And then from 6 to 12 months, half the fee would go in. And at the 12-month mark, there would be no longer a phase-in period, so it would be the full fee. And then one of the last components is the fee in lieu. And so in several of the zones noted at the bottom of the slide here, there is a requirement for common outdoor space of 75 to 100 square foot per unit, depending on the size. And the idea is that would be provided on site for those residents. It's not meant to be a public park like the rest of the system we've been describing. The existing regulations allow a fee in lieu. There's not much in the way of criteria. One idea is to be more specific about how that fee in lieu would work. So one aspect of that is to set a rate. And having the neighborhood park costs in hand from some examples and the level of service proposed allowed a calculation of sort of an equivalent cost per square foot. So that would make it easier to determine what that fee in lieu is when someone requests it. And then the other part of it would be to allow 100% fee in lieu if you're within a half mile of an existing or planned park. And the fees would go towards public park improvements to enhance the capacity of those parks in lieu of providing private space close into a park. But recognizing there's a lot of different character and issues on other properties in the city, still allow for a fee in lieu of up to half if you're beyond a half mile. And the idea here is a developer could determine they want to maximize their on-site dwelling unit count and realize more profit from that angle. And then the benefit would be that the city could enhance public parks nearby that will benefit those residents. I wanted to point out just some minor typos we'd like to correct in the parks element, just a couple of wording grammar things on the left-hand side here in the vision statement and the description of the hazard mitigation plan. And then one of the actions at the end of the element, we'd like to focus more on how the city would consider filling needs in recreation programs and not assume that the city needs to prepare a recreation services plan, but rather how the city will consider gaps and filling those gaps. So, York, do you want to take it from here?
Yeah, thank you, Lisa. Great walkthrough. Hopefully this is laid out clearly for the Planning Commission. Much appreciate all the work that Bob, Lisa, and others have put into this since a month ago when we came to you last. So at this point, the initial staff recommendation, again, just like the other items as part of this package, is to approve the resolution. You have not seen this resolution yet. We've drafted it and are ready, and we'll bring it to you 2 weeks' time. The initial staff recommendation is to approve the park impact fee, the park element, the capital facilities element, and the fee in lieu amendments as laid out in the attachments to the staff report, exhibits A1, 2, 3, and 4. So at this point, I think the time is right to hear from the public, have any questions and discussions and deliberations by the commission. We thought that the proposal had changed enough and this was a substantial enough of a proposal that it made sense to just go ahead and assume one more meeting for the commission. But that doesn't mean that we need to leave a lot of work for that meeting. If you're able to arrive nearly at a decision today, all the better, and then you can think about it for another couple of weeks. We also thought that there might be some input that came in from the public that we'd want to think about, and possibly even some questions for us. So I'll turn it over, unless there's any other thoughts from Lisa or Bob. I'll turn it back to the commission to ask any questions you have, start some discussions, and hopefully make it as far along the way towards a recommendation as you feel comfortable doing.
Yeah, thank you, York and Lisa. Appreciate all the work went into this. For my part, I can say I appreciate the presentation. Looks like a lot of work has gone in since our last time, and thank you. Do we have any commissioner questions and comments? Commissioner Finch.
Thank you. And thank you, Lisa and Bob and York, for the presentation. I think this was much improved over the last time the commission met to discuss this. Significantly more clear. I've got a number of questions, and probably best if we just go kind of one by one down the list. Can you confirm that the proposed impact fees would only be used for growth and not maintenance of existing park assets?
Yes, by law, that's the way it works. And so the projects that add capacity, they could either be new parks or trails, or they could be doubled in size, or some other kind of increase in the size of facilities. So it could be adding a ball field, expanding a playground, other things that add capacity for more people. Those would be
okay
for the impact fee.
That's great. So it's really about increasing capacity of either existing assets or purchasing or improving new assets to provide for excess capacity.
Yes.
Okay, great. And then the total impact fees, you mentioned that there's a school impact fee, a transportation fee, water connection fees. Can you give me a sense of what the total impact fees for one unit of a new development would be? Is that a total that has been discussed or evaluated?
It depends. All of those depend on the characteristics of the development. So school impact fees are assessed at single family or multifamily, multifamily 1 bedroom or multifamily 2 bedrooms plus, and a different one for townhouses and a different one for accessory dwelling units. So it depends on what kind of a unit, but it is, I think, $5,000 roughly for a single family home. Traffic mitigation fees depend on the number of trips estimated to be generated by the development, and that is calculated using standard manuals, ITE trip generation manual to estimate, and then there's a fee per trip. I have a estimate for one single family home, maybe $2,400 for a single family home. So maybe
I guess
rough.
Not to make you try to go through each one of these, but I guess from my perspective, I think understanding the total impact fees to providing new housing is important relative to other jurisdictions. I mean, I think that from a developer's perspective, whether it's a transportation fee or a park impact fee, they're looking at the total amount of impact fees to their development and putting that number in their pro forma. And so I think pulling out just the park impact fee isn't telling the whole story from an economic development perspective. So that would be one area that I would like to know more about. Are there certain types of development that are exempt from the proposed impact fee?
Yes, we have not included fees on education or government. We've shown a reduced fee, not a complete exemption, for affordable housing and or low-income housing, and I believe it's nursery schools. I'm trying to get to the right section of the code here.
Child early learning facilities.
It makes sense. Yeah, I mean, I think that makes sense as it relates to the different housing types. Given that some projects are developed with subsidized financing. And given that they don't contribute to the tax base in the same way that, say, market rate housing might from a value perspective, I'm not sure that reducing the impact fee is beneficial to any of the stakeholders. So I might suggest not reducing the impact fee for different housing types, or I should say different housing income types. Talked a bit about the ability to pursue grant funding in the presentations. Is it the presence of the park impact fee and the plan, or the amount of the impact fee that is important to pursuing grant funding?
So the impact fee can be used as a match to go seek grant funding. And other communities have benefited from having an impact fee in order to create the matching dollars to go after larger dollars. I don't know, York or Bob, if you have other examples, but that's just my understanding.
But I mean, it's the pros plan that's required. I mean, I think that was the
yes. Yeah, the pros plan is necessary. The Recreation Conservation Office requires a plan in order to be eligible for grants.
I see. Okay, so the pros plan is the eligibility requirement for grants. The impact fees, that money could be used as a match.
Yes.
Okay, all right. I think we have a good handle now on level of service targets going forward, as well as the existing level of service. Do we know how the level of service for Everett compares to other cities? We've looked at the pricing of impact fees for other cities, but I don't recall seeing a level of service comparison with other cities.
For the pros plan, we have been collecting what we would call benchmark data for Everett compared to other jurisdictions. Generally, Everett's system is a little bit smaller given the population. So the acres per capita, the miles per capita, the playgrounds, serving the population and all that kind of stuff are a little bit less. In some cases, the city's, on par with these other example jurisdictions. But generally speaking, for a city the size of Everett, it's not outperforming those other communities, I guess I would say.
Okay, all right. So we don't have a significantly higher level of service than these other communities that we're looking at?
No.
Okay, all right.
I think if we're looking at a strict acreage per 1,000, I think we would be in the lower end of the spectrum.
Yeah, I mean, I understand that, and I think that probably as you get to more and more dense cities, that's probably true, right? I mean, comparing us to a less dense city with more land area, they're going to have more acres per capita. Thinking about the city's 720 acres of assets that you noted could be candidates for expansion. I'm assuming these are all well inventoried. Do we know if they're proximate to where we have planned and anticipate new development to occur?
Yeah, so just wanted to mention it's 920 acres, and that does include the two golf courses. So in terms of where the park assets are, some of them are definitely in proximity to where growth is planned. There are some, Wetmore Plaza downtown, Forest Park, a number of assets are near where growth is planned, but a lot of the gap areas that we're seeing in the 10-minute walk happen to be near the station areas and along Evergreen, and even in parts of downtown, the Metro Everett area. We're seeing gaps in those areas. And significant growth planned in the comprehensive plan.
I mean, I think that is, to me, one of the larger concerns is I think that open space is an important kind of public health element to a successful city. as we plan for more growth and increased density in Metro Everett, how to make sure that those residents get a high level of service as well, I think is something that we need to keep in mind. It's just not how the metrics show on the page, but it's also how it kind of stacks up and as it relates to population growth and density. Thinking about the fee in lieu, I mean, that I want to be clear, that discussion is somewhat separate from the impact fee, correct?
It is separate in the sense it's not necessary for the impact fee. I think it might be fair to say the city does get these requests occasionally. And I think in consideration of that maybe a developer might want to maximize on-site units and put the money towards the park system, this would give some criteria for how it works. Mm-hmm. There's already a system in place.
And if there was, so I mean, I think this is a good idea, and I know this is a strategy that other cities employ. If a developer, for example, downtown were to pursue a fee in lieu, number one, are their assets near enough that they could do 100% fee in lieu? And where does that fee go? Does it go to fund projects within that sphere of influence of that development, or does it go into a general pot that can get used in any way?
I believe as we wrote it, it would go into a fund and need to be spent within 5 years for projects that are in the capital facilities element. And there's a number of projects there identified that are meant to, to address. I think one of our main areas of focus for new assets is neighborhood and urban parks.
Yeah, that's correct. Quick correction, I changed it to 10 years of collection just to give us a little bit of flexibility on that. Although if there's a problem with that, we can change that back in the next draft. And it would go into the same fund, as I understand it, as the other impact fees. And so we will do the best we can to match the growth locations with the new park capacity. But there may be some differences in time between.
Sure. No, I understand that. I do think that's an objective, though, to keep front and center, because otherwise it seems like there's a disconnect there. We talked a lot about, you talked a lot about the absolute park impact fee, but one of the metrics I'm interested in is how the fees relate to the fundamentals of development. So rather than total fee per unit, for example, or per bedroom, it would be interesting to see comparison of proposed impact fees as a function of rent per square foot per month, as well as a function of median home prices and median home values per square foot. Because I think that it's not just the absolute dollar amount, it's does the project pencil as we layer in more and more of these impact fees. And so I think we need to take into account the economics of these real estate endeavors. And I'd like to see a comparison of that against the subset of cities.
Yeah, we did some work on that. It is the more you peel back the onion, the more layers you find with that. So we did some work looking at a few example developments and layering up park impact fee, traffic impact fee, school impact fee, water system development fee, sewer system development fee, stormwater fee, and permit fees. Those are, I believe, just about all the fees that get assessed at the time of development. But that still doesn't tell you the entire story of what it costs or what the value proposition for development in Everett versus a neighboring city might be, because there are other tax rates, let alone the market, the market demand and all that. But there's different property tax rates, which are partially a function of the city, partially a function of special districts like the school district. There are business and occupation tax differences. There are sales tax differences, and all of those go into the equation that a developer pulls together when they're deciding whether to take on a project and how to structure that project. And then all of that has a flip side, is all of those taxes and fees then create either capacity that is just essential for the development to work at all, like water. The development's not going to work unless you are able to extend the water supply to it. But then things like the park impact fee create demand and create a better environment for supporting the rents that a development would like to see, especially over the long run. It's not necessarily going to make a big difference from one day to the next, but in general, the better schools you have, the better parks you have, the better maintained your drainage facilities are and everything else, the more rents that you can charge. And then there's more layers beyond that, because then you get into the affordability question and everything. So it's we worked pretty hard on that over the last month or so to make sure that we are appropriately balancing the park impact fee rate and the need to maintain an asset that's important both to the city's residents in terms of quality of life, but also to the city's competitiveness and ability to attract residential and commercial development, while making sure that we were in line with our competition, other cities, unincorporated county, and all that. And I will just say that it was a very difficult exercise, difficult to replicate and explain to everyone else, but we were comfortable with where we landed in terms of our own fundamentals and competition with other jurisdictions. So we can get you some of those figures and those details for some of these projects, but just know that that's not going to tell as much of the story as it might seem at first glance.
Sure. No, I understand. It's an elaborate algorithm that goes into that. I'm just glad that you've looked at it. So that's what's important to me. To get into the weeds a little bit, there's a slide called potential revenue for parks, and it outlined a couple of examples relative to permitting over the last 12 months. And the retail in particular jumped out at me. So the 3,000 square feet of retail at the 50% reduction, that's $4.62 a foot. That seems a lot higher to me than, say, industrial on a per foot basis. And it struck me as odd because I think for a variety of reasons, we want to encourage retail in our city. I think retail fuels demand for mid-rise and high-rise living. It also fuels our tax base, the revenue of the city. And so I want to be sensitive to, where our money comes from and how we generate demand in our city. And so please take another look at that.
It should be 41 cents a foot. So that would be on me if I got that wrong, although 3,000 times 41 cents seems like 1,300. Yeah, so the math should be right. 41 cents a square foot.
3,000 square feet divided by $650 is.
Oh yeah, that's the 1,300 is the 41 cents. Yeah, and then divided by 2, so that's 20 cents a square foot at the 50% mark. So
maybe
right.
I'm just not understanding that slide.
There was one development in the last year, a new, it was at 7,500 Hardeson Road, a new 3,000 square foot retail building. And at 3,000 square feet times 41 cents a square foot, which is the 100% rate, that's the 1,300, and then at the 50% rate, that's cut in half. Lisa, does it seem like I got that math right?
I think so.
Spreadsheets, it looks right. So that would be a one-time charge.
Got it. Okay. Yep. Understood. Got it. And then, I guess the last question is really, I'm assuming that the economic development team has signed off on the park impact fee as proposed, and I'm also assuming that I couldn't quite tell, but it appears the staff recommendation since the last planning commission meeting may have changed a little bit to reflect some of the questions and comments you previously received and some of the discussion. Is that fair statements?
Yes.
That's correct. Yeah, the last time we had 4 options, and I believe we identified option C as the preferred, and the 50% discount would be half off of that. And I think that reflects both some of the comments that we heard from the public, from the Planning Commission, and our own internal discussions that I just mentioned.
Okay, great. That's all I've got. Thanks.
Thank you. Good questions.
Thank you. Any other commissioners? Commissioner Zelensky.
And you're muted, Commissioner Zelensky.
There. Can you hear me now? Okay.
Yes.
Yeah, just a comment. I did spend a lot of time with the material you provided. I thought it was a very well put together package. Your presentation tonight, I thought, was also very cogent. And I spent a lot of time in my planning career at Snohomish County in capital facility planning in general and impact fees in particular. And I think what you've put together here is a very solid proposal with pretty conservative fee levels. I'm glad the city is finally getting on board with park impact fees, and I'm very comfortable with the proposal as you've written it.
Thank you, Commissioner.
Thank you, Commissioner Zelensky. Any other commissioners, questions, comments? Okay, I'm sure we have some guests tonight who wanted to speak on this topic, so let's get to that, please. If anyone has signed up in advance, Kathy, we could go through the list, or maybe we could just call through who we do have and see if they wanted to speak. I see Mr. Sluter is raising his hand. Maybe we'll just go ahead and call on you. Thank you. Appreciate it. If you could just start by introducing yourself for the record.
Sure. Thanks. Good evening, members of the Planning Commission. I'm Dylan Sluter. I'm Snohomish County Manager at the Master Builders Association. We did previously provide some written comment on this issue, and we appreciate some of the response to that within the staff's return of those questions from the commissioners, as well as I think it addressed some of our questions as well. So I would like to say I appreciate the reduction factor going into this one. I think this is a more reasonable rate going forward. However, I did have a question about the phasing approach. Given that this is a new fee, I think we would like to see that phased in approach a little longer. I know I believe the city of Kirkland's looking at a fee increase similar to this, and I think they were looking at 3 years. So since this is a new fee and we're starting at 0, perhaps pushing that phased approach out a little longer so that pro formas that have kind of been in the works can still work within their plans, and then anyone that's been sort of eyeing Everett can have something reasonable going forward, that they can have those expectations. I think another thing that I had a concern on, and I think Commissioner Finch asked a great question related to the CIP or the facilities element, and how those, I guess that percentage that I saw within the graph where it says % related to growth, and what those projects were. I kind of like to dig in a little more to see a little more of how that was sort of justified or put into it. I understand a lot of it was based upon future growth and how many acres and how much more system improvement was needed. But I just want to make sure that those align correctly with how impact fees can be used. Obviously can't be used for existing deficiencies or for maintenance and operations of existing facilities. So we want to make sure that, if this fee is going into place, that it's going to be a reasonable rate that makes sense, that can be useful. And I think there's just a couple other points I want to make. I believe in my comment letter, the National Association of Home Builders releases some priced out market data, and I really enjoy this data. And for the state of Washington, for every $1,000 that you increase the median price of a home, their estimates are that 2,500 households can no longer afford that home. So we're in a very price sensitive market. So things like fees matter when it comes to affordability and what that looks like to people being able to buy that home. I think there's other data that the National Association of Home Builders look at, and for every $1 increase in a fee, it's actually about $1.20 that goes on to the developer. So there's sort of like a 20% surcharge for interest rates and financing and other things. Plus, if you're looking at time as well to pay that off. So there is some sort of analysis that's gone into it on the impact of these impact fees. So we just wanted to make sure that we're having that communication. We look forward to continuing to work with the city on this. Obviously, the updated version is better. However, we're always very sensitive to price, and so it is difficult for us to support something like this, but we do appreciate the staff's time as well as the commission's time to try to get this right. So I think that probably concludes what I have to say, but I appreciate it. Thank you.
Thank you very much for holding on and for your comments. Any other guests wanting to address the commission tonight? Members of the public?
Hi. I'm just on a phone, so I can't raise my hand.
Go ahead. If you just introduce yourself and go ahead and make your comment.
Okay, this is Laura McMurray. I'm actually on the tree committee and the parks board, but I'm only speaking for myself at this moment. And I am very grateful that the park impact fees are being taken very seriously. And I would actually argue to have 100%. So I'm actually in favor of maximizing the funds that can be captured in order to deal with expanding our parks, basically the territory of our parks, which is an ability to expand our green space. And that right now it is a very important component of dealing with climate change and the climate action plan. So the fees, I think, are not just all of the wonderful things that parks do. It's actually a really important component to addressing climate change because of the green space captured in parks. And that's all I wanted to say. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Appreciate that. Any other members of the public wishing to address the commission? Okay, I'll just hold on for one more second. Anyone else? I know sometimes we're a little tricky with the technology. If you are out there, just go ahead and unmute yourself and go ahead and speak up. All right, sounds like there is no additional public input tonight. Maybe I'll go back. Oh, go ahead.
Hi, this is actually Laura McMurray again. Can I add something?
Oh, sure, go ahead.
Or is that?
Go ahead.
I just wanted to say that I agreed with the not actually giving a reduction for affordable housing. And yes, I'm very much in favor of affordable housing, but the problem is the way the category of affordable housing gets put in, it usually has sort of a limited shelf life. So it's not going to stay necessarily affordable housing the way it's handled legally. And so I think it's just better not to reduce it for the affordable housing. It's better to have parity with all the units. Anyway, thank you.
Great, yeah, thank you. Okay, sounds like since there's no other public input, I'll go back to commissioners. Did we spur any other questions or anyone else that we missed earlier? I guess I'd like to I have a question and maybe a comment. I guess my first question is this. One thing that occurs to me is if we impose an impact fee and say we go with the 50% recommended by staff, I mean, that would generate a certain amount of money, but as we know going into it at that level, in order to really keep up the level of service, that's not going to be enough, it sounds like. There's going to need to be other funding sources. I could imagine a situation possibly where those other funding sources don't come through, or perhaps the costs of these new developments start outpacing the revenues generated, so that the money is just inadequate there. I guess one concern, is there any trigger that requires there to be a parity between the level of service and these rates? I guess what the concern being is, what if we got into a situation where we're imposing these impact fees, developers are paying them, and it's potentially adding costs of development and being passed on to residents in various ways, but we're also not able to keep up with that level of service anyway. Is that a concern, or could that happen under the way this is structured?
It's, we adjusted the timing of some of the proposed projects to allow for the LOS to ramp up by the city seeking some other funding sources. I think it is fair to say if there were no other funding sources beyond what the city has already been contributing, plus the impact fee, there probably would need to be some adjustment to the level of service, but by phasing some of the LOS and completing the PROS plan, I think we're trying to give enough room to seek these other sources. I think one source that the city could look to, it's not guaranteed, but grants, by defining the city's needs and then the differences in the districts and what equity approach the city could take to investments that could help the city achieve grants. The city has had some grants. It's just not enough likely. So I think, but by having impact fees and having the match and having a plan, that should help that aspect to some degree. But I think, Bob, it's fair to say, the other sources might have higher dollars, like a Metropolitan Parks District or a levy, but they also are not necessarily, guaranteed either. They require, a lot of work and votes. And so I think that we put in a built-in 5-year review in the proposed impact fee to come back and see, like, how's it going? Is it going well? Should there be any adjustments at that point? How's the city been doing on the other funding sources?
Yeah, our proposed level of service. Oh, I'm sorry.
Go ahead. Sorry, go ahead, please.
I was just going to add that our proposed level of service would barring review periods, would stay the same. But the actual level of service would have a lot of factors that would go into it, the rate of growth versus how fast the money's coming in order to be able to do the projects. Whether we get grants. So there's a lot of it's hard to say whether or not our actual level of service would keep pace with our proposed level of service. But we have some strategies to try to make that happen. And from my perspective, even at the 50% rate, it's going to help us with future growth and trying to keep up with level of service at today's rates as compared to $0 in impact fees. So, for this from the city perspective, from the parks perspective, it's definitely going to help with our level of service.
And then that one chart we saw that based on last 12 months, it estimated roughly 1.7 million in new revenue. What does the parks currently have a budget for new parks growth development? I guess trying to put that into context of what 1.7 million would mean to the current budget of the parks department.
So we have capital dollars that we utilize. Most of those are REIT 2 dollars. However, most of our REIT 2 dollars have gone to renovations of existing facilities and amenities, not really to new growth. Some of it has gone to new growth. We've talked about Emma Ewell. We did get some grants for Emma Ewell, and we are using our REIT 2 capital dollars for matching. We've partnered with the YMCA for land donations. So there's a whole bunch of strategies to try to make that growth happen in that deficit area. But a lot of our existing capital dollars that we would typically use for growth is really necessary just to keep up with renovating existing structures, which is not allowed by the impact fee. So the impact fee would definitely be needed in the future. As I was saying, even at 50%, it's going to be a lot more to deal with growth than we currently have available.
Right. Okay. Well, yeah, I just guess I'd close with a comment that I really appreciate the scaled down presentation tonight and the new proposal. Obviously nobody likes to pay more for stuff, but parks are important and nothing's for free. So everything I'm seeing here looks to me pretty reasonable, and obviously unfortunate that there's going to be extra cost, but everything's going up. I did want to say that when I was looking at the phase in, it did seem to me that maybe that did seem a little bit rapid. I imagine some larger projects, I mean, they take 12 to 18 months just in the planning phase. And I could see that, I don't know what's in the works currently, but I could definitely see 6 months maybe catching some, projects into, pretty far along in development kind of off guard. So it would seem reasonable to me to maybe extend that phase in period as well. So thank you. I appreciate everybody. Any more commissioner questions or comments? All right. Well, it was proposed that we keep the public hearing open until our next meeting on the 19th. And I don't know if it would be good form just for us to have a vote on that for the record, and maybe we could also add in continuing the keeping it open as to item 5B as well. I think maybe that might be the best thing. Do we maybe have a motion for those two matters, or any discussion about that beforehand? I guess maybe I'll move that we keep the public hearing open for item 5B and 5C until our 10/19 meeting. Anyone want to second that?
I'll second it.
Thank you, Commissioner Labra. Kathy, could you go ahead and call for a vote on that?
Yes.
Kathy, we can barely hear you.
That was Commissioner Finch.
Oh, yes.
There we are. That'll help. Commissioner
Perfect.
Zelinski,
Yes.
Commissioner Labra,
Yes.
Commissioner Holland,
Yes.
Chair Yanasak.
Yes.
Thank you.
All right. Well, thank you. So maybe before we conclude today and adjourn, do we have any closing comments from staff?
Thank you all for your attention today and your in-depth reading of the packet. Great questions, great discussion. Thank you to the two folks, Mr. Sluter and Ms. McMurray, for sticking through this long meeting and giving your valuable input as well. Thank you. Thanks, everyone. Good night.
All right. And any concluding remarks from commissioners? All right. We'll see you on the 19th. This meeting's adjourned. Thank you.